This audiobook is brought to you by Career Designer 360. To know more about us, kindly visit our website www.careerdesigner360.com. If you like our work, do like our Facebook page Career Designer 360.
Crossing the Bar by Alfred Tennyson. About the poet Alfred Tennyson, 6 August 1809 to 6 October 1892, was a British poet. He was the poet laureate of Great Britain and Ireland during much of Queen Victoria's reign and remains one of the most popular British poets. In 1829, Tennyson was awarded the Chancellor's Gold Medal at Cambridge for one of his first pieces, Timbuktu. He published his first solo collection of poems chiefly lyrical in 1830, Claribel and Mariana, which remains some of Tennyson's most celebrated poems, were included in this volume. Tennyson's early poetry, with its medievalism and powerful visual imagery, was a major influence on the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. About the poem Crossing the Bar, an elegy written by British poet Alfred Lord Tennyson, is a poem focusing on the transience of life and finality of death. Crossing the Bar was written in 1889 when the poet was visiting the Isle of Wight and published in a volume Demeter and other poems. He was 80 years old at the time and was down with severe illness, from which he eventually recovered. The illness, however, made the poet ponder on death, as he himself was very old and nearing his time. He uses the metaphor of crossing a sandbar to represent death in this poem. He died 3 years later, and although he wrote a few more poems, he requested that all of his poetry volumes be ended with this poem. Thus, the poem is an important one and can be seen as Alfred Lord Tennyson's choice of his final words. Form and structure. The poem consists of 4 stanzas, and each of them are quatrains. The poet uses the classical rhyme scheme of ABAB. The structure of the poem is akin to that ballad verse, but it falls short of the meter. There is no apparent meter to the poem. The length of the lines is a feature of interest in the poem. The poet varies the length of the line between 10, 6, and 4 syllables per line randomly throughout the poem. The entire poem is connected, both in theme and conceit. The stanzas do not stand individually on their own. They are tightly knit and carry the meaning forward to the next ones. Summary. First stanza. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. The poem begins with the speaker describing the atmosphere. He says it is sunset and the evening star can be seen in the sky. Someone is calling the speaker. It is clear, unmistakable call. It is the call of death. The speaker believes that his death is close. It is interesting to note here the imagery the poet presents before us at the start of the poem. Sunset and evening star represent the end of the day, just as the day is about to end, the speaker says that his life is drawing to an end as well. And me, there be no morning of the bar when I put out to sea. Here, the poet uses his famous metaphor of crossing the bar, describing death as an act of passing beyond life. The word bar here means a sandbar. A sandbar is a geographical structure which forms around the mouth of a river or extends from a spit by slow deposition of sediments carried by the current over millions of years. The structure forms a kind of barrier between the water inside, the river water, and outside it, the open sea. The poet uses this sandbar as a symbol of death, with the water inside representing his life and the water beyond representing the afterlife. He wants to put out to sea. Without the mourning of the bar, the poet wishes his death to be without pain and without mourning. Second stanza. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam. Through the poem, the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson compares his impending death to crossing a bar. In the stanza, the speaker of the poem talks about the inevitability of death. The poet wishes that when he put out to sea, that is, when he dies, let it be like a ride, which seems asleep as it moves. The speaker wants his death to be smooth, like a calm sea wave, which is too full for sound and foam. The speaker hopes that his death will be silent, smooth, and quick, making no fuss. When that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. In the subsequent lines, the poet uses the example of the river and the sea to express the kind of death he wishes for himself. The water from the sea evaporates and turns into clouds. These clouds bring rain, entering that water into the river, and these rivers too flow, carrying their water and eventually pouring it into the sea. They thus complete a cycle, and the water returns from where it came. Just so, the speaker, considering himself like the water, says that he is returning where he came from. The boundless deep here apparently stand for the sea, and in an allegorical sense to the place that poet believes he will go to after his death. Third stanza. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark. In the third stanza, the poet again resorts to describing the atmosphere to convey his inner feelings. It was sunset when the speaker started the poem, but now it is twilight. The sun has already gone down the horizon and dusk is settling. The speaker can hear the evening bell tolling. It is the indication that night is approaching. Then after a while it gets dark. It is night. The poet here uses twilight to show us the state of his life. Just as the day has ended, his life too is about to end. Here, twilight stands for sadness, darkness, and grief portray the speaker's miserable state before his death. And may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. The speaker expresses his hope that there will be no sadness of farewell upon his death. The sadness of farewell is ambiguous and can mean both the speaker's own sadness as he departs from life, or the sadness of the people whom he leaves behind and who are saying farewell to him. However, we think the former is more relevant. Again, Lord Tennyson writes, "When I embark to convey the idea of the speaker's death, thus it is evident from the word embark that death is not seen as a final destination by the poet, but rather as a new beginning." Fourth stanza. For though from out a bourne of time and place, the flood may bear me far. In the previous stanza of the poem, we see the speaker's positive attitude towards death. It is seen to be exemplified in this final stanza of the poem. We understand that the speaker has accepted his reality, inevitability of death. He appears to have made his peace with the idea of his fast approaching death. I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. These final lines of the poems are shrouded in allusions and hidden meanings. Firstly, we are told that the speaker hopes to see his pilot face to face when he will have crossed the bar. Here, the word pilot is a direct reference to God. Lord Tennyson had peculiar views on religion. On one hand, he disapproved of Christianity, while on the other, we see wide use of religious things and ideas in his works. Since God is considered to drive the world and all living things, we see the pilot reference of the divine world in the poem. The poem thus ends on a positive note, with the poet both accepting the finality of death and hoping to meet God in the afterlife. Theme of the poem: Death. The sandbar is Tennyson's metaphor for the boundary between life and death. Then, crossing the bar is all about crossing from life to death. But if you think you are in for a morbid poem, you are in for a surprise instead. This poem is all about accepting and embracing death rather than fearing the dark unknown. Death is not the end, but a new beginning. The reference to the sunset suggests as much. The sun sets, but it always rises again. Old age. It's also about what comes before death in most cases. Old age. The reference to the sunset and evening in the poem remind us that the evening of the speaker's life is in full swing and that night or death is fast approaching. But the nice thing about old age is that it comes with its fair share of wisdom. And in this case, our speaker has grown wise enough to know that death isn't an end, but a beginning. Literary devices. Metaphor. Line 2:16. The bar, the sandbar, can be considered as a figurative representation of the barrier between the life and death. Line 7. The boundless deep. There is a close resemblance to the deep sleep which is usually connected to death. Line 9. Evening bell. The death knell which announces the arrival of death is depicted through the evening bell in the poem. Personification. Line 3. And may there be no mourning of the bar. The bar is given a human emotion of mourning, intensifying the tone of the poem. Line 5. Such a tide as moving seems asleep. The act of sleeping is used liberally to leave an impression of stillness during the arrival of death. Line 15. I hope to see my pilot face to face, along with lot of nautical references in the poem. The poet goes so far as to call death the pilot, giving it recognition as a person who shall navigate his final journey.